If you've ever been told by someone to be quiet, you know the frustration that comes with someone trying to silence you. Fortunately, we live in a country where everyone has the freedom to say whatever they want, regardless of how wrong or controversial it may be. But what if our free speech was limited or even taken away? Recently, I read multiple academic journals and local news articles about free speech to remind myself of how important it really is. While freedom of speech is protected by the US Constitution, recently there have been some attempts to try to limit what can be said. That is why today I will be talking about some of these cases and what needs to be done to protect freedom of speech. First, we will talk about some of the threats. Then we will discuss what is causing this issue. And finally, we will look at some solutions to our problem. The article Courts versus Campuses talks about how rules have been changing at campuses. It notes that in 2010, many schools made designated areas for freedom of speech. This means that the students have to protest and give speeches only in this designated speaking zone. These rules are enforced by the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officers, also known as DEI. Recently, we have seen some of these examples in the media. We've seen at many major campuses protests between students protesting the involvement of their schools in the Israel and Palestine war. Some schools have responded with aggressive disciplinary action. They have postponed or even canceled graduation ceremonies and their speeches. New York Times article, How Should Colleges Handle Student Protests, by Natalie Prowl, mentions students have been suspended and even arrested at some of these protests. She says, quote, suspension and arrest didn't used to be a tactic, but now we are starting to see that as an immediate response. Another example to this growing issue is in an article by the OC Register. It was written by Michael Slayton. This article talks about politicians Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene. These two politicians are conservatives and had speeches lined up in the city of Anaheim and Riverside. Both of these speeches were canceled last second because people in social media were pressuring the cities to cancel these speeches. These examples show that this growing issue is affecting every political ideology, and it is being used as a tactic to silence those who have opposing political views. Now that we have learned about this issue, let's take a deeper look at what is causing it. The main cause of this problem is people trying to interpret the Constitution in a way that favors their beliefs. Fortunately, the Constitution makes it very clear. In the article, The Redefinition of Freedom of Speech, the author talks about this issue. And they give a quote from the Constitution that makes it very clear. It says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Another reason is people in power want to silence those who have opposing or controversial views. For example, in a New York Times article by Natalie Prowl, she mentions colleges trying to silence protesters, and the reason they're doing that is because of wealthy donors, important alumni, and politicians pressuring them. A counterpoint made by people who are in favor of some limitations to freedom of speech is they want to protect the public safety and sometimes the speaker's safety. This point, while sometimes it is valid, can sometimes just be used as an excuse for their actions. Now that we know what is causing this problem, let's talk about what can be done to improve this situation. One simple solution to this growing problem is just less government interference. This would require the government to respect everyone's right to protest and to say whatever they want, unless there's a legitimate threat of violence. This idea is based on the theory that the solution to problematic speech is more speech, not less. This quote is by the authors of Censoring Freedom of Speech is Unethical. Another solution that could be implemented is by suing those that try to censor them. An example is, again, in the article by Michael Slayton. The judge has ruled that in the case of Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene versus the city of Anaheim and Riverside, that case can move forward. That means that in the future, cities who try to cancel speeches because they do not like what they have to say or public pressure will probably think twice before doing this because the courts will not be on their side. Another example of litigation being used to protect freedom of speech is in the article Courts versus Campuses. This article talks about the school Georgia Gwinnett College. In 2021, this school was sued because a student wasn't allowed to use the designated free speech zone. This case later went on to the Supreme Court, where the judges ruled in favor of the student and they were ordered to pay the student $800,000 in damages. Lawsuits like these should give everyone confidence that the Supreme Court will continue to protect freedom of speech. A different approach that can be used is to just stop making designated free speech zones in colleges and allow the students to express themselves throughout the campus. A good quote that explains this is by Natalie Prowl. She says, "A university's role is to foster debate, even if it's messy, rude, and disruptive, not to attempt to smother it." After learning about this issue and some ideas for a solution, it is clear more needs to be done to protect freedom of speech. First, we talked about some threats to freedom of speech. Then we learned why we are having this problem. And lastly, we went over some solutions that can be used to restore everyone's right to freedom of speech. Now that we have seen some cases of this increasing problem, I'll leave you with this. We all know free speech is vital to our democracy, or as G.R. Lanou puts it, free speech is the barrier to the tyranny of authoritarian or even majority opinion. Because of that, we need to respect the First Amendment and not try to limit it.